subjects: English grammar, literature, and composition. One day when I was in Study 4, a doorway into the wonder and mystery of the maths I was terrified of slipped open. Something that brought light into what was mysterious and fearful has never left me. In that moment, everything good and great was possible. To find an entryway into the mystery and myth that seizes our lives, your lives, mine, and drive our journeys, there are arguably four primary elements you need. One, you need questions. Question especially, and this is to the students, especially the expected, the dogma, especially in and of your life story. Two, the imagination and its different dimensions. Today I will mostly going to refer to the poetical imagination. Three, space. To reflect, to create, to ponder, to dream, to be silent, to emerge. Four, another, your audience, receiver, your mirror, your recipient. And this is as an aside and a message to those intending to explore the world of story. The questions are your gemstones. Every step you take begins with a question. The primary one being, what if? It is this that carries you into the realm of your imagination. As with most of the things one might imagine, one has first thought. When you set out to define those notions, you find that there are a million others who have been there before you. So, philosopher, Professor Richard Kearney, whose book, The Wake of Imagination, is a great reference to you students, says, our creative imaginative power to shape and form what is imagination? Is our creative power to shape and form and figure. Let me read again. Our creative imaginative power to shape and form and figure is a gift that can go in two directions. He characterizes the human imagination as a creative capacity that can be turned to both good and evil purposes. Also, capacity whose ethical dimension needs to be nurtured to make it responsive to others. Why should you give a damn? I quote from erudite Renaissance woman, and I'm going to put her on the spot. Scientist, technologist, thinker, scholar, African and dear friend, Dr. Sheila Ochuboju, for whom Kenya is a space of retrieving both her creative soul and imagination. She had said in an email to me, the visual tools needed by many are often inadequate to the task of reading African books. In the end, we need more windows in. The word in. We need more windows in. The words must paint more pictures for us to understand the text. The prevalent visual clues that are easily available to us are mostly Eurocentric. They bombard our lives with images and texts that are often subliminally derogatory and contrary to the ideas and values we want to speak to. It's more difficult to compete for the attention of our youth, especially the emerging and growing cohort who look outside of Africa for what is considered cool. We may lose them forever if we cannot convince them of the compelling narratives in our stories. And she also adds, our minds are capable of holding an exponential number of images and narratives, and also hold contradiction quite comfortably. In addition to what Sheila suggests about the exile of generations from the African imagination realms, because of the hemorrhaging of resonant archetypes, I am convinced, I've said this before, I am convinced that the main violence too, and the most formidable blows against the African and Kenyan imagination are self-inflicted. I have in other forums faulted the public education choices which have not only neglected to educate, grow, and stimulate the imaginations of our citizens from cradle to grave, but have also contributed to the cultural imaginations of suffocation, failure, loss, exile, and even more dangerously in some cases, it's retreating into underground realms of some seriously sordid darkness. Over the years, we have drained our national lexicon of words or images that describe or explain our epic moments, our triumphs, our tragedies, our holocausts. Reading national texts like newspapers or watching the news or listening to radio, it appears that the country is stuck in a single framed image and text. Most of our public characters sound the same and even insult each other in the same way, usually with words appropriate from American gangster rappers. The outcome of a sustained neglect and assault on the Kenyan imagination is not an abstract or neutral thing. If the youth are not looking to other worlds where the imagination flourishes and generates new ideas and products for better or worse, then we're afflicted with a wily older generation whose distorted yet powerful presence and imaginations channel the restlessness of especially younger men. A decrepit age that steals the lives and destinies of the young who are lured, usually by the framing of a glorious imagined past and its repositories, into defending indefensible things and being invited into acts of uncommon evil in the deeds that also trapped this same older generation in the first place. The inciting older generation, believing themselves to be archetypes, also demand absolute loyalty from an unquestioning, disengaged age set who never learned or were ever allowed the responsibility of developing their distinct voice, their personal vision, or reflecting on templates of a life presented to them as reality. And I'm speaking to you, especially students. That perverse imagination plays out in our Kenyan spaces, where, for example, you hear unquestioningly, I might add, declarations against other Kenyans, so that, I'm paraphrasing clearly, the other, anyone who does not think, look like, or talk like a prescribed us, is evil. The other Kenyan is non-human, monstrous, diabolical, and therefore deserves to be excluded, hated, displaced, condemned, or killed. In a place where the space of critical self-reflection is eroded, since nature abhors a vacuum, the people in that space always seek someone else to blame. That is, they resort to the child's way of hiding from reality and responsibility. You know how children caught out in mischief and fear always try to blame something else. In our larger world, it plays out in the sustained slaughter of young men convinced to be suicide bombers by powerful myth holders that have displaced the sense of a story of a compassionate and merciful God. The template feeds the energy of groups like, and I was being politically correct here because I could have also said Baghdad Boys or Mungiki. The template feeds the energy of groups like Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab. We can all collectively go when we experience the horror story that young men who live out the personality of Al-Shabaab execute. But can we who are targeted also call forth a more potent, heroic, and resonant story that would challenge the one by which they abide? Can we? Yet how do we even begin if the fundamentals of story structure or learning the color of light or the placement of music are absent from national lesson plans? Even if these are other ways of thinking, tools that bring personal light into darkness encountered on personal or communal journeys. Weapons used to exercise deep fears find healing for even deeper wounds and emerge with more profound questions and stories by which we can abide, personally and as a nation. What happens if they're not taught? You want to hear what a selectively harnessed imagination is capable of? There was a man of Kenya who in 1959, aged 29, conceived and implemented a nationwide airlift to the United States. Say what you want about Tom Mboya, but I defy you to name a single other Kenyan before or since who has ever revealed a vision for lifting up a whole nation without consideration of ethnicity, and to carry over 10,000 men and women to access the best of knowledge and skills available in the world to prepare the nation he loved. The airlift was extended to 6 other African countries. Can you name another person who has done that in the history of Kenya in the last 50 years? The deed not only impacted Kenya's destiny, but America's as well. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what an ethical imagination can achieve. McAdams would call Tom Mboya a highly generative person. A person who lives out a story that gives life to many. A person whose story not only reveals his sensitivity to others' lives, sufferings, and dreams, but is also guided by a clear and compelling personal ideology, a compelling personal story, which entwined his destiny with that of Kenya, a man who had set goals for the future dream of Kenya, whose design of the Kenya flag is one of the mythic standards of each of our identities. When we paint our faces red, white, green, and black, we are painting into our lives the colors of a murdered patriot's dreaming. So for me, and questions of my Kenyan being, especially provoked by the post-election violence, I had to glance at the top. It's a topic I look at in the book, Dust. It's to understand something about a country, my country, that sets out to murder the best of its own. What kind of nation gets so terrified of a grand imagination? What kind of people annihilate the hold of a persistent and transcending dream? Why? The book does not offer any answers. It does, however, suggest a desperate need for the collective imagination to restore a voice to ghosts such as Tom Mboya in order to exorcise our national hauntings, all those ceaseless subterranean forces that hold our country back. Am I wrong in stating that as a country we have a terrifying tendency to lurch from one incomplete and painful episode to another, without the relief of resolution or denouement, handing over uncompleted lives to the next generation and the one after that? We watch in bewilderment as our officially sanctioned madmen and madwomen run rampant in public spaces, screeching one incoherent thing after another and conflating the country with their egos. We are shamed when we meet the broken reality of the myth we have owned, and aware that it was doomed to break because it had purged itself of our personal best and deepest dreams. It can never be whole without each one of us. The book Dust, even though it unfolds in our post-election violent season, proposes that the seeds of the Kenya stories of unraveling start when we kill and bury the people our illusions and nightmares have murdered secretly, and hope that they shall, to paraphrase a new Kenyan coinage, they shall accept and move on. Dust says they don't, and neither do we. Unless the offense committed against life itself is named, acknowledged, and atoned for, it builds on a theme that is also in Weight of Whispers and my other lesser-known works. The source of life's question to Cain, the prototype human. Cain, where is your brother? The Lord then said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Remember what Cain had said? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? That's a question I ask. Am I my brother's keeper? I am exercised by the question of all our Kenyan ghosts and why we keep making these ghosts. Why are we unable to tell stories that resurrect and enable the collective to appall to them and to each other, so that we might find our way to real peace? Why are we more willing to suffocate the whole country in order to silence the wailing? And why so many of us willingly collude in the silence? I'm one of the accused in the collusion of the silence. Why do we choose amnesia and not wonder why we are needlessly and endlessly restless? Back to imagination. I'm convinced that the primary African and Kenyan crisis is the crisis of imagination. The arts, the locus for the education and stimulation of the imagination, has been eroded and then leached out of national school curriculum. It was depressing to learn last year that the composition exam standards in the country have fallen so far that some teachers are just grateful to be able to read one almost sentence in English. But if a citizen cannot construct a coherent worldview, how will they situate themselves in the world at large, with all the assorted voices coming at them? The loss of an educated imagination means that in the narrative life of our nation, we have been unable to retrieve or create words to contain our suffering or our glory, or to offer these names, images, and a lexicon, and the process through which they are purged or understood. In the end, we are cursed with bloat-headed individuals who imagine that heroism is an acquired enterprise that ill-gained money bestows on a person, completely unaware that they are making the mistake of the naked emperor who flashed his buttocks to his pub people, imagining, and the unharnessed imagination can be tricky that way, that he was adorned in exquisite gold robes. For those of you who have time and need some comic relief, please study our new governors and analyze their evolution of manners. Study our daily newspapers, the news, witness the anemic African Union cycle of narratives. They are never one of power or of capacity or creative agency about anything. But boy, can they do victim brilliantly. Never mind that they are trustees of the wealthiest continent on the earth. Imagination. Every child is born with the seeds of a mythic imagination. And with the splendor of our Kenyan spaces, the triumph of the image of species that share our human lives, you can be sure that the Kenyan personal and collective mythic imagination would be superior and grand and compelling to all the world. Every child requires the mythic imagination to evolve a unique, powerful, personal story by which they will live. Every child imagines him or herself without a problem as an astronaut, Superman, Shaka Zulu, that was my little brother when he was 4, a policeman, a teacher, something with a heroic identity. As an aside, I was going to say the idea of heroism is in our human and national DNA. So yes, as a collective, we are wounded when the ideal of the image of our warriors, our KDF, was sullied by images of them carrying nakumat plastic bags and performing the archetype of the common thief. The shock to the psyche will not exit the collective, no matter how many decrees and commandments are passed, unless a process, a kind of ritual of atonement or reparation is undertaken. As I was saying, every child has a mythic imagination, but every dreaming child also falls into the hands of adults, parents, teachers, even priests, who will proceed to squeeze it out until they have molded a perfect clone, repeating the same foolishness that has sustained a particular mediocrity and inability to rise beyond the mundane. We cultivate a generation of productive robots who, yes, produce extremely well and with global competence, but who dare not dream of finding new stars, who have been taught to mistrust their dreams, the space of power greater than any oil find. They are allowed to imagine that the stars are there to be reached by others. They do not know or have not been told that you can reach new stars, name them after your mother when you imagine and write a story called Star Wars and film it. You can reach those stars by inventing a spaceship called Voyager, or even by imagining building the Hubble telescope and creating an infrastructure of minds that gather around a great vision. Your imagination innovates high-value products that create global economies, things like the iPad, your iPod, and your iPhone, because you were taught from the day you wailed your way into life that with your imagination, all things are possible. You just need to tell yourself the story of the possibility. At the heart of every piece of art is a story. At the heart of every innovation is a story. Every dream is powered by a story. The life of a country is the story its citizens tell about themselves and each other. It is in the personal and collective imagination. This, the imagination, ladies and gentlemen, is at the heart of a plea for securing the arts not only as a teaching tool, but as a resource of national growth. This country, I believe, has an exceptional mission for its people. The life forms within it and the world. The evidence is in the wealth of our diversity, which anemic imaginations have turned into threat and fear. We are asked by a ridiculous bunch to be afraid of each other, to reduce ourselves always to the smallest unit of communal being, the thing called tribe, even while we share a life space named Kenya. The evidence of the grand summons is in the wealth and diversity in our environment. Our flora, our fauna, our landscape, 8 different ecosystems in this small Kenyan space is a wonder in itself in the world, but so fragile are our imaginations that we do not even glory in this. We are unable to see that everything points to a nation invited to a spectacular destiny and purpose, but which for so many unstated reasons, it consistently sabotages. In the story of Dust, the female character Adhiambo is one finally confronted by the horror of the hidden national realities revealed through her brother's death. In the book she stutters. It's a kind of speechlessness to mirror our national silences. She uses painting to draw and call forth images and stories by which to live. And when her father, who has lost his own capacity to believe, finally understands that this too is a way of thinking and being, he then asks her to paint a way out for the family. And while doing so, to image forgiveness. For everything that debilitates our hopes, we also have solutions that are resident in every imagination in this land. Here alone, there are how many? 100 possible solutions to ending Kenya's impasses. But we dare not do this because we are frightened of transcending dreams and hopes. We call them impossible. And in killing the imaginative life of citizens, we have created a great chorus line that hurry in front of a vision to scream, no, never, it cannot happen, for all these reasons. It requires heroism to be able to do what Jesus said, have faith to move mountains. For this enters the realms of the mysterious unknown. We are nervous because, what if the mountain really moves? We also don't do it perhaps because we know that to question the norm is a daring and dangerous thing that sometimes asks for your life in exchange for a greater good. Because we have excused ourselves from the treasures that delving into the realm of imagination offers, we've also excused ourselves from creative contemplation of the dark, mysterious aspects, which is a part of life. Thanatos, the death, we experience the death we create. You who are in this university, some of you are about to graduate, have you been prepared for the seasons in life when everything will fall apart and everything, and even meaning will taste like ash? It'll come, you know. But preparations for this demand a plunge with light into the realm of the imagination. But with this example, you do understand why sometimes it's easier to live with questions rather than enter those unknown spaces to seek answers. Kenya is older than 50 years, as you are so well aware. Its name and future, the one we inhabit, came together in the imaginations of some unknown Imperial British East Africa Company man, whether by will or destiny. It does not matter now. Here we are, mostly Kenyans. The outcome of a single distant imagining, even when we deny it. And no matter what, it is sound, no matter what, it is futile to try to take that away. We are living that vision, whether we like it or not. Ladies and gentlemen, what have you imagined lately? What image, idea, future, story has shaken your life and lifted it up, and perhaps planted the seeds of a country? Kenya celebrates 50 years of independence and self-determination. Congratulations, Kenya. But you, how do you experience yourself in the Kenya storybook? Is it a love story? Is it a horror story? Is your Kenya the one of hashtag we are one? The one you vicariously live through the rugby 7 pitch? What have you imagined lately? Where is your story within it? And how do you express, or how will you express it? A quick segue into the funny story and imagination. Kwani Proper started in the garden of the editor of East African, Mr. Ali Zaidi, on the occasion of an event he had hosted to honor Bikabanga for winning the Kane Prize. Many of us who had crawled out of our closets sat there in awe, marveling at the idea that a Kenyan had managed to leapfrog over the gatekeepers to reach the world with a story that resonated with us and with my generation. But I also remember us complaining around the fire to Binyavanga about the gatekeepers, of manuscripts submitted and lost, of the demand that we must portray the village British doctor and the goat, of works criticized without being read, of being accused of being an-African, or too urban, or too elitist, or too something, anything that ensured that nothing different would emerge to challenge the idea of what a Kenyan or African story was. Oh, we complained and complained, which by the way is a weaker way of questioning, until Binyavanga snapped, and I'm paraphrasing his words, F this. There are no effing excuses for self-complacent mediocrity. With so much to do, what's the point of all this hot air? Technology has opened the frontiers, and the world is there for us to redefine. We conquer the world by our imaginations because we can offer to it universe that it has never imagined. We don't have money to print a magazine, but we have the internet. and the primordial Kwani space appeared as an online publication. It launched with Weight of Whispers, which propelled me, kicking and screaming, into the literary world. Kwani Trust became the space where many of us felt safe and challenged enough to re-engage our dreaming selves, our hidden imaginings. The book Dust is a consequence of this wandering and wandering. I offer it to you, as is my standing here with you, now ending this monologue in anticipation of a wild discussion. Thank you.
Ese no se chato.
Actually, when you go to Africa,
This is Chinese one, yeah.
or it's and that will that it is an act, so it's a willful act that can project on souls of our hearts, of our senses, of our having everybody there, from belonging to China, the loving Africa, there are, the continent has its passionate lovers, but the continent also has those who do not understand that it's a writer from Kenya. And that it is
a traveler, an observer of our human happenings
in so many
that are
ways.
inspired by the stories
Those who know, actually know this continent is,
it's not as if I go looking,
but know it for themselves and assume in so many ways that actually they are the only custodians of this continent. We are actually in their way.
And it always happens through landscape. So whether it's the desert landscape of northern Kenya or the ocean that I absolutely adore, or more recently on the train ride from Bergen to Oslo, suddenly the overpowering sense of the snow and snow landscapes, and it struck me in such a way, almost like an epiphany. I had no idea that it was so diverse. So when the feeling of that stays with me, then I know, it all starts with landscape. So almost as if the muse sends you, the palette is landscape, and then you're kind of thinking, someone or something is going to show up, and then you follow that person, the character, and that becomes the story. Actually, my own ode, my own praise of the ocean. I absolutely love. I truly love. I adore that ocean. I met the Swahili Sea when I was 7 years old, and I'd never seen anything more splendid. And it means that my entire life, it makes me ocean haunted. And I guess because of that, I was always going to write something about the sea that I love so much. But then also within the context of our relationship with China, I noticed that a lot of mostly, I guess, Western conversations are kind of bewildered in terms of what does China have to do with Africa? They're so far away, but actually we're not. We're neighbors if you consider the ocean, if you consider the Western, what they call the Western Ocean, what we call our Swahili Sea or Indian Ocean. And we've been neighbors for a long time. And it's about the ways of looking at the ocean, the biographies that are in the ocean and under the oceans as well. And so then there was no way then in terms of, because this is also a book about relationship, And there's no way that the ocean would not have a prominent role as mediator, as midwife, as a matchmaker as well. And I was interested in the African position, in the East African position, and kind of the intimate histories of this China reconnection. And at that time, when I started out looking for this story, I was not considering it a reconnection, even though the evidence of that had been very present to me when I was, for example, the executive director of the Zanzibar Film Festival. My favorite Chinese restaurant there is owned by a fourth generation Zanzibari of Chinese origin. And so our histories, because of the seas that we share, our histories with China are very long and very deep and very actually intimate and profound and intricate as well. And the Indian Ocean is unique among all the other oceans in the world because it has its currents were very consistent, very mathematical and very consistent. The southeasterly and the northeasterly. So the boats could come into the East African coast and boats could leave the East African coast. And the East African coast in multiple centuries, long before Europe was even considering cosmopolitanism. These particular oceans, because of the regularity of this current, there's been an intricate connection of linked trade and exchange between China and East Africa, but also India, what becomes known as the Middle East or Arabia, Persia. So it's not just China that where you find the connections. You'll find, the Swahili dolls are variations of the Gujarat dolls. There's a fabric called the lesso, the kanga, that's very, very distinctive, linked to the particular coast. But the cotton was made in India, and the designers were in East Africa. The transportation was by, Sri Lankan. So there was this intricate globalization, the global connection. And it's the idea of not just the fluidities, not just of identities, but of exchange, belonging, of trade, and a kind of hospitality linked to, I think at the core of everything was trade. Frankly, it was trade and exchange of goods. And this was what? This is a kind of, it's over 1,000-year-old history. It changes, of course, now when great competitions come in from, say, starting with Portugal, and of course the Hadramites, or not quite all, Yemeni Arabs. There's a sense of wanting to control, wanting to take hold of the East African entrepause, because this is kind of the central point through which not just trade but also knowledge is passing through, and unfortunately, when especially at first, when the Portuguese initially the Portuguese were well behaved, but when the competition for kind of ownership of territories entered into the game, the Portuguese, the British became real asses. And what they actually did was disrupted delicate balance. I'm not saying everything was perfect, but what I'm saying was that there was it never entered into any other culture's mind that they could control and own the seas. So and with the entry, especially of the British and the Portuguese, there was an amputation. Those links were completely amputated. But what is even more tragic was that people like Admiral Freeman, when they went to the archives in a place called Witu, what they basically would do is they bombarded the archives and with the intelligentsia inside, and burnt down the archives and the records. It was very deliberate. It was part of the strategy was the burning down of archives and records, so that another history of the sea would be written on top of what had been an experience. Yes, I think it was the late Binyavanga. I think Binyavanga always shows up in my work. He's the one who told me, get the hell out of the way of the story. So I never set out to say, I'm going to write this historical novel or, I'm going to use, but history as a palette is very important for my own art. My own growth as an artist. It shows up. I need its energy. I need its absence. I need its darkness, and I need its mysteries. And I guess its response to the East African, the African Yvonne, the artist, the African as artist, because I think it's part of the outrage of the amputations and the histories that are deliberately written over so that Africa could be portrayed a particular way. And then you go and you find the ruins of that. And maybe my work is partly also an attempt to repair some of those ruins for my main audiences, the Africans, and at least the children to come, so that they can have references and remember that some of the stuff that is written in the history books about them is a lie. And if they want it, they can actually go and find, enter into the realms of their own stories. Yes, yeah. So I look for the histories that have fallen into the cracks and bring them out, yes. And in 2005, a young girl then from this island that's it lost its glories, but it's a massive island called Pate Island. It was part of the Lamu archipelago. Now, the backstory is that when the great Chinese admiral Zheng was leaving the East African coast on his 7th voyage, returning to China, that was just before China turned its back to the seas. He lost a third of his fleet in a terrible, terrible storm. And then it seemed that some of the sailors survived and ended up on Pate Island and decided to stay and got married. And even though it set up settlements, but the settlements already pre-existed. The settlements that were there preceded them. So there's suspicion. I've been to that island a few times. So it's very possible and very likely that there'd been a long history of trade and exchange between China and this part of the world, of the East African coast. So when the sailors settled there, of course they married and did what sailors do. And so there's a generation that have kept family names, like Wei, Famao, Shi. There's also Pate Island names. And this girl, she's now doctor, at that time, Mamaka Sharifo, through DNA testing, suggested that she had Chinese antecedents, and she went to China on a scholarship to study Chinese medicine, but also to meet in a very moving. I talked to her, and she said how moving it was also for her, in a way to meet other descendants from the particular voyage. So I was so inspired by that particular story, and this happened in 2005, at the 600th year anniversary of China's, of Zhenghe's voyages, and used the inspiration of that story to tell the story of a little girl growing up on Pate Island, and who ends up going to China, yes. So in the novel we have Ayana, who is the illegitimate daughter of a single mother in an island that's also, it's been one of the most liberal of islands, but there are certain values that and even it's also very matriarchal, woman-centered, but there's certain rules, you need to have a husband kind of thing. But her mother decides to raise her on her own. So there's a kind of stigma attached to her, but that doesn't stop her from looking for, expressing her longing for a father. And so she appoints a returned boatman, Muhyiddin. She appoints him as her father, against his own kind of, he resists everything, because he's never wanted anything to be attached to him. And that, yeah, and it was fun exploring that rediscovery of love, of the affection between father and daughter. And quite frankly, I think I was partly inspired by my own father had died at that particular time when I was working on this book, and maybe it was a tribute. It was partly also a tribute to him, my own father. And maybe I would have put the qualities, the qualities that my own father had. But it's the rediscovery of vulnerability, and love makes you very vulnerable, and makes you weak in an interesting way. And for Yana, she finds a pillar. The kind of pillar that she wanted. So there's that, and then there are all these island characters. What I love is when, especially when East African readers say, "Oh, I know this woman. I know this woman so well." And yes, they're inspired by people I didn't meet and I didn't know. Especially in Zanzibar, you don't get mad, you get even. So, I'm reading from the Dragonfly Sea, and I will start with the poem. No, actually, not quite the poem. Kind of a will, a testament that one of the great luminaries of Pate Island, Mwana Kupona Binti Msham, left for her daughter when she thought she was going to die. Take this amulet, child, and secure it with cord and honor. I will make you a chain of radiant pearl and coral. I will give you a clasp fine without flaw to wear on your neck. Wash and perfume yourself and braid your hair. String jasmine and lay it on the counterpane. Adorn yourself in clothes like a bride and wear anklets and bracelets. Sprinkle rose water on yourself. Have rings on your fingers and always henna on the palms of your hand. Mwana Kupona Binti Msham. The soul is a visitor, Roho ni mgeni. To cross the vast ocean to their south, water-chasing dragonflies with forebears in northern India had hitched a ride on a sedate in-between seasons morning wind, one of the monsoon's introits, the matlai. One day in 1992, 4 generations later, under dark purplish blue clouds, these fleeting beings settled on the mangrove-fringed southwest coast of a little girl's island. The matlai conspired with a shimmering full moon to charge the island, its fishermen, prophets, traders, seamen, sea women, healers, shipbuilders, dreamers, tailors, madmen, teachers, mothers and fathers, with a fretfulness that mirrored the slow churning turquoise sea. Dusk stalked the Lamu archipelago's largest and southernest island, trudging from Siu on the north coast, appending Kizingitini's fishing fleets, before swooping southwest to brood over a Pate town that was already mouldering in the malaise of unrequited yearnings. Bruised by endless deeds of guile, siege, war, and seduction, like the island that contained it, Pate town marked melancholic time. A leaden sky poured dull red light over a crowd of petulant ghosts, dormant feuds, forfeited glories, invisible roads, and congealing millennia-old conspiracies. Weaker light leached into ancient crevices, tombs, and ruins, and signaled to a people who were willing to cohabit with tragedy, trusting that time transformed even cataclysms into echoes. Inside Pate, a cock crowed, and from the depths of space, a summons, the azan crescendoed. Sea winds tugged at a little girl's lemon green headscarf, revealing dense black curly hair that blew into her eyes. From within her mangrove hideout, the scrawny 7-year-old, wearing an oversized floral dress that she was supposed to grow into, watched dense storm clouds hobble inland. She decided that these were a monster's footsteps, a monster whose strides left streaks of pink light on the sky. Seawater lapped at her knees and her bare feet sank into the black sand as she clutched another scrawny being, a purring, dirty white kitten. She was betting that the storm, her monster, would reach land before a passenger-laden dhow muddling its way towards the crocked wharf to the right of her. She held her breath. Homecomers, she called road passengers. Wajio. The child could rely on such homecomers to be jolted like marionettes whenever there was a hint of rain. She giggled in anticipation as the mid-sized dhow, with Bikidude painted in flaking yellow, eased into the creek. Scattered soft raindrops. The thunder-spirited rumbling caused every homecomer to raise his or her eyes skyward and squawk like a hornbill. The watching girl sniggered as she stroked her kitten, pinching its fur in her thrill. It mewed. Shh, she whispered back as she peered through mangrove leaves, the better to study the passengers' drizzle-blurred faces. A child looking for and gathering words, images, sounds, moods, colors, conversations, and shapes, which she could store in one of the shelves of her soul to retrieve later and reflect upon. Every day, in secret, she went to and stood by the portals of this sea, her sea. She was waiting for someone. The girl now moved the kitten from her right to her left shoulder. Its extra-large blue eyes followed the dance of 8 golden dragonflies hovering close by. Thunder. The dhow drew parallel to the girl, and she fixated on a man in a cream-colored suit who was slumped over the vessel's edge. She was about to cackle at his discomfort when a high and hurried voice intruded. Ayana! Her surveillance of the man was interrupted as lightning split the sky. Ayana! It was her mother. Ayana! At first the little girl froze. Then she crouched low, almost kneeling in the water, and stroked her kitten. She whispered to it, Haiduru, don't mind. She can't see us.
Part of my recent call has been the idea, the quest for a new African origin story, a new African origin myth, a binding story that will it is an act, it's a willful act that can project the idea, the notion of the Africa of our souls, of our hearts, of our senses, of our dreams.